Hey Goblin, you've been really practicing those war drums.
I'll bring the generic Goblin noise!
Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's patron shoutout is to Real Name. Thanks for supporting me through Patreon. In today's game we have Mika, Maximus, and newcomer Ian joining me. And Mika is playing his Rith deck, keeping a Plains, Wooded Foothills, Krenko Tin Street Kingpin, Cultivate, Lightning Greaves, and 2 Forests. Ian is playing his Urza deck, keeping Armix Filigree Thrasher, Exotic Orchard, Underground River, Obscura Storehouse, Noxious Gearhulk, Supreme Verdict, and Command Tower. I've got Halana Alena, keeping Mountain, Carplusian Forest, Rockfall Vale, Uncivil Unrest, Rampant Growth, Stomping Grounds, and Beast Whisperer. Last but not least, Maximus is playing his No Counters Talrand, keeping 2 Islands, Sol Ring, Favorable Winds, Strixhaven Stadium, Submerge, and a Coveted Jewel. Before we get into today's game, I want to talk about the sponsors for my channel. Card Conduit is the best way to sell your unused Magic cards. Whether you've got a box of unsorted bulk, or a complete and alphabetized set, there's a great option for everyone. With a payout averaging 19% better than using any one buy list, and that's after fees are applied, you can rest assured you'll get the best bang for your buck. If you're a skeptic like me, their easy customer service and detailed reports make the whole interaction transparent and safe. And if you use the affiliate link in the description below, or the promo code MTGMUDSTA, you'll save 10% off their fees. And 401 Games, Canada's one-stop shop for trading cards, board games, and hobby supplies. Not to mention an easy-to-use and great online buy list. And if you use the promo code MTGMUDSTA, your first purchase of MTG Sealed and Singles will be 5% off. And Dragon Shield, the strongest sleeves for your strongest deck. So be sure to use the code MUDSTA or the affiliate link down below to save 5% on your next order. Mika wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws, plays a forest, and casts Birds of Paradise. Ian just plays a Command Tower. I play a tap Stomping Grounds and pass. Maximus draws, plays an island, and casts Sol Ring. Mika's got a Plains for turn, and is able to tap 3 to cast Cultivate, and passes while he's searching. Ian draws, plays an Underground River, and passes. I've got a Forest for turn, and pay 2 for a Rampant Growth. I pass to Max while searching. Maximus draws, plays another island, and then casts Talrand. Mika plays a Wooded Foothills, and then pays 3 for Krenko Tin Street Kingpin. He follows up by casting Lightning Greaves, and equips him onto Krenko. Moving to combat, Mika swings Krenko at Ian, and gets to put a +1/+1 counter onto him, and then makes 2 Goblin tokens. Ian then takes the hit, and Mika passes. Ian draws and plays a Plains. He's got enough mana now for a Lochiel, and passes after that. My main phase has me drawing, playing a mountain, and I then pay 1 red for Gamble. I go into my library to search for a card, and then randomly discard a Rockfall Vale. I pass to Max after that. Max draws and plays a Stinging Lionfish, and then casts Favorable Winds. He passes, and during his end step, Mika cracks the Wooded Foothills. Mika draws and plays a Forest. He casts Kadira, and moves the Lightning Greaves onto her. He then follows up with a Skull Clamp, and he goes to combat. Once more, Mika swings Krenko at Ian, and Kadira and 2 Goblins go at me. Krenko gets his +1/+1 counter, and none of us block, which has Mika making 3 more Goblins, and then a bunch more bunnies thanks to Kadira's trigger. With nothing else, Mika passes. Ian draws and plays a Swamp. He drops an Ethereum Sculptor, and then draws a card from Lochiel. He then plays Armix as well, and passes. My turn has me playing a Carplusian Forest, and I then pay 4 for a Chain Reaction to try and wipe away the board. With the wipe on the stack, Max casts Submerge to put Talrand on top of his deck. Everything then dies, with Mika drawing 2 cards off the creature dying with a Skull Clamp. Max just draws, plays a Strixhaven Stadium, and passes to Mika. Mika plays a Reflecting Pool, and then casts Rith. He moves his equipment onto it, and then goes to combat. Mika swings at me with Rith in retaliation for my board wipe, but doesn't have the mana to activate the ability after connecting, and just has to pass. Ian draws and plays an Exotic Orchard. He then casts a Forsaken Monument, and passes turn. I've got a Forest for turn, and cast Beast Whisperer, and then pass. During my end step, Max adds a counter to his Strixhaven Stadium by tapping it for a mana. Max draws and still can't find a land, playing a Thought Vessel instead. He's then able to recast Talrand and pass it to Mika. Mika draws and has a Windswept Heath as his land drop. He then goes to combat and swings Rith at Ian, who takes the hit. Mika then pays for Rith's trigger, choosing green, and makes 2 Saproling tokens. In his second main phase, he clamps both of them to draw 4. Mika then follows up with a Sakura Tribe Elder and passes to Ian. Ian draws and plays Filigree Attendant. He then drops an Obscura Storefront, sacrificing it to go and find an island, and passes. My turn is pretty boring, as I draw, cast Uncivil Unrest, and pass to Max. Max's turn has him casting a Coveted Jewel, drawing 3. He finally finds a land with the Riptide Laboratory, and plays it, and then casts an Archmage Emeritus, and then passes to Mika. During Max's end step, Mika cracks the Windswept Heath, and sacrifices the Sakura Tribe Elder to go and find 2 lands. Mika's turn has him playing a Fortified Village. He then plays Cathar's Crusade and goes to combat. Mika swings Rith at Max, and Max is forced to give up the jewel since he can't block, and then takes the hit. Mika then draws 3 from the jewel, and then activates the jewel to pay for Rith's ability, and gets 4 Saproling tokens after naming blue. The Cathar's Crusade puts 4+1/+1 counters onto everything as well, and in his second main phase, Mika then plays a Darksteel Ingot and passes to Ian. Ian draws and goes to combat. He swings the Filigree Attendant at Mika and takes the jewel and draws 3. He's then able to play Urza, and then plays an Isolated Chapel. Ian then passes, making a construct from Urza at the end of his turn. I draw and play Cami of the Whispered Hopes, giving it haste with Riot. I'm then able to tap it to help cast Halana Alena, and give them a +1/+1 counter from the Riot trigger as well. Going to combat, I put 5 +1/+1 counters onto the Cami, and then make a deal with Ian to get the Coveted Jewel to try and find an answer to Mika. This has me swinging the Beast Whisperer at Ian, who doesn't block, and I take the Coveted Jewel, drawing 3, and then Ian takes 2. I don't draw into anything sadly, and just cast a Gyre Sage after combat, putting a +1/+1 counter onto it, and passing turn. Max draws and plays an island. He then makes a deal with me for the jewel, and hits me for 2 with his Archmage, drawing 3 cards as he takes it. After combat, he casts Azami, and then taps her to draw a card. Sadly, Max doesn't find anything to help deal with Mika either, and he has to pass turn. Mika draws for turn and plays a Forest. He casts Rhythm of the Wild, and then plays Harmonious Archon, which grows Mika's team with the Cathar's Crusade triggers. Mika then tries to make a deal with Max for the Coveted Jewel, but Max refuses, so Mika goes to combat. He swings the Saprolings, Rith, and the Archon at me, and the human tokens go at Max. Max taps Talrand to draw a card, and then casts Crypsis to untap it, and then draws a card from the Archmage Emeritus as well, and makes a Drake token. In response to the Drake token, Mika then casts Swords to Plowshares and targets Talrand, but Max taps it, drawing another card, and then casts Snap. Max negotiates a deal with me to save me by using the Snap to help keep me alive, and uses it to bounce the Archon. He then activates the Riptide Laboratory to save Talrand, plus makes another Drake token from casting Snap. We then go to blocks, and I block Rith with Halana and Alena because they surprisingly have reach, and a Saproling goes in front of the Gyre Sage. And Max blocks the humans with his Drake tokens. I then drop to 2 though, and after combat, Mika casts Heart's Desire to make another human token, which has him adding a +1/+1 counter to his team because of Cathar's Crusade, and he then equips the newly made human token with a Skull Clamp. Ian draws and plays a Dimir Signet. He then casts Thought Monitor, drawing 2. Going to combat, he swings Urza at Max and the Construct at Mika. Max declares no blocks and gives the jewel to Ian, while Mika blocks the Construct with a human token. Mika then draws 2 from the Clamp creature dying, and in his post-combat main phase, Ian then casts a Chief of Foundry. He then passes, making another Construct token during his end step. I draw and play a Forest, and recast Halana Alena, and give them haste with the Riot trigger. I then play with the Ozolith, the Shattered Spire, as well as a Doomscar Warrior. I back up on Halana Alena with its ability as it comes in. I go to combat, and put the Halana and Alena's trigger on the Doomscar Warrior, and swing them both at Mika. I'm able to deal a whopping 30 damage to Mika, and I get 2 Doomscar Warrior triggers, the first of which is for 20. For the first one I reveal Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, and then I resolve the second one, going 10 cards deep, and reveal Xenagos God of Revels. With nothing else, I pass to Max. Max draws and plays a Nykthos. He then plays Leer, and casts Complete the Circuit, and then casts Snap, getting 2 extra copies of it to bounce 3 creatures. He bounces both of Ian's Constructs and the Filigree Attendant, and between his untaps, floats a bunch of mana from the Nykthos. He then uses some of that mana to cast and equip a Pennon Blade, and puts it onto the Archmage Emeritus. He then replays Talrand. Max then continues by overloading a Bluster Squall, and taps down all of his opponent's creatures. This makes him a Drake token, and he then casts Consider. And after it resolves, casts it again from his graveyard, and gets 2 more Drakes. Moving to combat, the Archmage with the Pennon Blade goes at Mika, and Azami finds her way at Ian. This has Mika getting taken out, and Ian takes nothing, but does lose a jewel because he can't block. Max then draws 3, and after that, casts Frantic Search. He draws 2, discards 2, and untaps 3 lands, plus makes a Drake token, and passes to Ian after that. Ian draws and plays a Marionette Master, and chooses the Fabricate mode to make 3 servo tokens with it. Ian then makes another construct on his end step, and passes turn. I draw and play a Forest. I then play Vorinclex, and put a counter onto it with Riot, which because of all the additional +1/+1 counter effects, ends up being a total of 6. I then cast Xenagos, who is able to enter as a creature because of my devotion, and he gets 6 +1/+1 counters as well. Going to combat, I put the Xenagos trigger onto Halana and Alena, and the Halana and Alena trigger goes onto the Doomscar Warrior. This has it getting 24 +1/+1 counters. Unfortunately though, it doesn't matter, because Max overloads the Bluster Squall in his graveyard again, tapping down our boards and making a Drake token. With nothing else, I just pass. Max draws and goes to combat. He swings all of the Drake tokens at Ian, and Leer goes at me. Ian tries to cast the Swords to Plowshares on a Drake, but Max is able to bounce the spell back to his hand with an Unsubstantiate, which technically is not a counterspell. I then die to combat damage, and with the Strixhaven Stadium jumping up to 10 counters, it takes out Ian as well, and Max wins the game. Game review time. This game was 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 23 seconds. And I like to think that it showcased some pretty sweet stuff. Despite the fact that I was so low health, I actually had a pretty aggressive board state, and I think without that Bluster Squall, I might have been able to win the game. I'm always a fan of people putting their own stipulations on their decks, and Maximus playing Talrand without counters seems like a really fun one. It forces him to rely on different types of ways to win since he's not going to be able to control the board as much, and the Pennon Blade in particular seems like spicy tech, as he's going to flood the board with his Drake tokens. Mika's Rith deck had an explosive start, and I think if it wasn't for the fact that I tutored up Chain Reaction with Gamble, we were probably going to be very dead very quickly. Between Krenko pumping out tons of goblins, and Kadira making a bunch of bunny tokens, I don't think Mika would have even had to have cast Rith to be able to win the game. Ian's Urza Chief Artificer deck was fun to see. I had yet to see this commander in action, I knew it existed, but I just never seen it in person. It seems like a fun synergistic artifact-based deck, but I will say it kind of bothers me a little bit that the artifacts from that precon have colored borders since they have colored mana symbols, despite the fact that they're artifacts. I know at that time there wasn't really much of a template for this, but visually I found it very confusing. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.